So in terms of what we're doing here tonight with getting everybody on to talk to the dev, this started when Rye and we've had tons and tons of conversations about like community transparency and stuff that people are wondering and stuff that people want and people wondering about where development is at and what we're currently working on and like trying to think of the best way of like, how do we tell that to everybody in a way where it doesn't just get kind of lost in all the messages and everything. And so that we can also be clear, and we figured it's easier to talk through stuff than it is to just write it out in messages and text and all that. And then we were like, oh, this could be kind of like a radio show or podcast sort of thing. And that's kind of why radio shows do it, where people send in questions and then you can answer them and all that. Because otherwise you get like Discord stuff where people are always talking over top of each other and things. So we thought we'd try this format to try to get, what are the questions that everybody really wants answered? And then how can we, get that answers to you in a, kind of fun and cool way like this.
Cool. That's a good explanation of what's going on. We'll definitely need some names for the radio show in the chat for future episodes, but for now it's just the dev Q&A. So did you want to start back with that first question from Stev asking about any plans for new weapons or gadgets in the future?
Right. So this is a fun question from Stev because Stev and I have been talking a bit, and they're an excellent animator, and we're looking at kind of new animations. Like one of the holdups on new weapons and gadgets and stuff is often just that like the first person animations are really difficult to make well, and especially with the guns and stuff, people pay a lot of attention to those. And we've had animators on and off kind of over the years right now, but it's like having somebody doing that and looking into that means hopefully we can get more stuff out with those. And one of the ideas we had recently, I was talking with Matt about this last night, is in Intruder, we have like the weapon types that kind of fulfill a role. Like there's an automatic weapon, there's a long range weapon, there's a shotgun, there's pistols. And one of the fears that we've had about adding new weapons is that they'll just be irrelevant because another weapon of that same type will just be superior to whatever the other one is. So we were discussing, okay, what if on some of the new maps and new official stuff, and even something like Checkpoint, what if in new maps or new modes, we specifically had weapons that were geared towards that, where you wouldn't be up against the traditional weapons in the game. And that would allow us to also experiment with the balancing of those weapons against each other, instead of like nerfing or buffing the SMG or the pistol in a way, because people have been playing with those for years and they might get upset about changes to those, and you don't want to go too far, with modifying those. So thinking about it more, I thought it might be an opportunity in the future with new maps and new game modes to kind of put more weapons in for that reason. But that could be, one of the ones we were thinking about was like a single shot kind of rifle, like an M14. And then another idea we were looking into was like a kind of tranquilizer rifle. And other gadget ideas that I was thinking about today, that would be for a stealth mode that Matt and I have been talking about. One of the gadget ideas, for instance, was a gadget that could detect the direction that bullets were coming from more accurately and the distance that they were at. So you could use it to kind of identify where loud bullets are coming from. Another one would be something for disabling security cameras in a room. So things that are more stealth focus was the idea. Those are the kinds of things that are in my head right now.
Cool. Lots of cool ideas there. Good to hear that these are being worked on, thought about, etc. So I'm going to bounce down a little bit to another question, a couple questions on the topic of new gadgets and new items. We have a question from Not Dan asking about goofy stuff coming. You've talked a lot about stealth weapons, more serious stuff like that, and while the vibe of Intruder is to be a stealth game, the goofy stuff is always fun as well.
Where is that question? I saw the wording of that question before.
That's from Not Dan. The word for word is more goofy stuff coming, question mark. Banana is all we have now, and then a crying sad face emoticon.
Dan, were you not here for April Fool's Day and the boxing gloves? And
Dan is not in the chat right now, so
no.
I feel like we'll have to ping Dan with vids of boxing gloves. Yeah.
The balloon gun or the banana rifle or the goober grenades and all that. That's typically, or the snowball gun.
Yeah, lots of goofy stuff, which is great.
We've actually invested a lot in goofy stuff. I like those things.
And I think sometimes the goofy stuff pushes the non-goofy stuff a bit, right? You get to test out development, so that's good.
Yeah, it has been the case where when we've made these goofy items, whether it's for a holiday event or April Fools or whatever, is it's actually pushed us each time to sort of look at the code and see, okay, how can we make this easier to make new things and new items? And even something like the boxing gloves was like, okay, how do we make a melee sort of item? And that was kind of a new approach that we had to take for that. So it is neat that it does push us to do new things. On the kind of philosophy of the game design and how often we want goofy stuff, my approach and inspiration for that with Intruder has always been like the Metal Gear Solid games and that sort of universe where you have a game that in one sense is hyper realistic and hyper detailed and ultra interactive, but then you also have like the cardboard box. So I really like kind of that sort of balance where you've got a game which you could take 90% seriously or so, but then there is some levity and there is some fun and playful stuff in it. And that's sort of my way that I think about Intruder for sure.
Nice. So that, good answer there. I feel like with balancing between goofy and serious. And you talked a little bit about how the development process works as well. And that kind of feeds into a question from Quartz Trooper asking, what are your thoughts on creating prototype weapons for rapid SPA testing? I'm assuming, the animations don't really have to be there. But, like, for example, like you said earlier, single shot gun. Mm-hmm. Thoughts on creating some prototypes for testing so that the balancing and stuff can get done in the testing?
Right. So with a prototype weapon, I think it really depends on what the characteristics of that weapon are. Like, would it be easy to take the SMG and basically just tune it so that it fired slower or it did more damage or it did more balance damage or whatever? Yeah, we could do that. Would it actually feel like, say, firing an M14? I'm not sure if it would without the graphics and the sounds changed up and things. And I think that kind of feel has a lot of impact on how a weapon, how much people enjoy using it. And then other stuff too, like, let's say part of using that new weapon is looking down the new, whatever sight that it has. It's going to have a different sight picture than the other guns we have. So it's like, could we prototype that by just attaching a different sort of sight shape to one of our current guns? Maybe. I'm not sure. And then there's other more complicated stuff, like if we did do a tranquilizer gun, for instance, we have to figure out stuff like okay, how does that work in terms of knocking somebody out and what happens when you're knocked out? All of these kinds of questions around, that. So it's pretty complicated. I have thought about a system where in the Mapmaker, you could create a projectile on your map, and then you could say to one of the guns, hey, shoot this projectile instead of shooting the current projectile that's there. And that could maybe be another way for people to more quickly experiment with changing the kind of properties of a gun and the projectiles that come out of it. So that's just another idea. I think that one, yeah, that's one I've been thinking about for a while, just for exactly that reason, so that people kind of in the community would kind of feel like, oh, I want to experiment with what if if the guns felt this way. Like right now you can tune some of the recoil and stuff like that, but actually tuning the projectile itself, you can't. So that's why I want to make that.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that seems pretty cool. I like those ideas. If anyone's not aware, we did something similar back when armor came out, where there was a tuning value for how much damage armor would block, and we went back and forth on those numbers quite a bit before we settled at the current damage blocking that armor allows. So you kind of talked about more prototyping, especially for map makers allowing that. So there's a couple questions from Spooky here. I think we might just want to hit kind of rapid fire. Let's start with he's asking, when can we expect a completed version of the attachment system that seems to be sort of present with the red dot site? And what other possible attachments do you have in mind for guns?
Yeah, so with the attachment system, when you're asking about things like flashlights and laser sights and things like that, there is an unfortunate side, like with the flashlight, like Duke was working on the flashlight thing for a while, but the really unfortunate thing is that's tied directly into the third person animation system and the syncing of that, because Duke was able to make it so that, okay, the flashlight on the shotgun, for instance, looks like it's facing the correct way from your first person character model, but getting it to look that way from the third person character model, because we don't have those animations as perfectly synced up as we want them to be, that results in some problems where you have a desynchronization between what you see in first person and what other people see in third person. And with a game about stealth, you want to make sure that, the direction a flashlight is pointing and whether you think you're being seen or not, that should be as accurate as we can possibly get that. And so that's been something where it's like, okay, we probably can't approach this in a really good way until we come back to the third person animation setup again, which is another question I saw that Spooky asked as well.
That's exactly what I was going to lead into there.
Yeah.
So from Spooky there, it's will we see the prototype for this physics-based third-person animations you were working on earlier? And what is your ideal vision for third-person animations if it's not quite what that prototype shows?
Right. So that prototype that I made a long time ago, I was really surprised at how awesome it actually looked. Like I was like, wow, like this looks pretty cool, even though it's using the same base animations that are in the game right now. When you just add those little physics bumps to it as you're turning and falling and all that, it just makes it look so much better. That was actually an idea I got from watching a video from the creator of the game Overgrowth, David Rosen, where he talked about animating the characters in that game using physics, and that you could get animations that were otherwise very stiff looking very good if you added some kind of dynamic physics to them. There was a couple problems with that, and part of the reason why it's not implemented yet. One of them was back when I was making that, I still don't, we still haven't had anybody else do third-person animations in the game, except for me, like years and years and years ago, which is wrong. So we haven't had anybody else doing those. And when I was working on that system, a mixture of the scrunch and the leaning while you're in prone, I couldn't get that to line up correctly and work correctly. And that was a scenario where I needed more animations to be done in order to finish that. And so I didn't have that at the time. So that's something to come back to. And the other part of it was that those physics bounces that you have, those looked really good if you're just playing by yourself and only looking at yourself, where your movements are perfectly smooth, and where if you drop from, you know, a jump or drop from the second floor to the first floor, if you land on that first floor and your character kind of bounces when they land, that looks really good if you're playing offline and by yourself. But when you're having the characters networked like they are in a multiplayer game and like in Intruder, when the characters are moving around, they don't move so perfectly. Like sometimes there might be like a little jitter or a little slowdown before you land because of how the character positions are interpolated. And so some of those physics kind of reactions that look perfect when you're playing by yourself then wouldn't look perfect. So that's something that would need to be tuned a lot. But there's other things that would definitely work, like the kind of IK system that was set up so that, you know, right now when your character looks up and down, they like break their back basically, leaning forward or looking up, and it looks ridiculous. Or when you're prone, you're always flat horizontal no matter what. The IK stuff with that, where kind of the character holds the gun more correctly, and as they look up and down, instead of breaking their back backwards and putting their head into the wall behind them, we'd be able to use that to make it so that, you know, you just look up with your head and raise the gun upwards. So those systems would work.
So following up on that, so you're talking about animations, getting that feeling good. Question just came in from Shala, which I think also is kind of echoed a bit in a couple of the other ones, kind of talking about what are the plans for resolving some of the current issues in the game, such as like people see desync between animations, like with the camera stick, with your head poking out when it's not supposed to.
Yep.
Similar things like that. While we know that you're working on new stuff for new animations, are there any plans about current situations in the game?
Yeah, so everything I just talked about with the third-person animations, that would apply to things like the camera stick, things like where is my head when I'm prone, or where is my body or arms when I'm leaning or in different positions. When we would go through and set up that new third-person animation system again, one of the goals for that would be to make sure that the alignment of your first-person camera and third-person and all that is much closer than it is right now, and that it's, you know, and things like the camera stick too. Because we'd be using those IK systems, we'd be able to have a much more accurate positioning of all of those things than we currently have.
Awesome. Good answer. I like it. Following up on that, we've got another question, a couple questions here. I'm going to just refer to the one from Quartz Trooper again, saying thoughts on how older mechanics will work in the game still. Stuff such as armor, balloon camera, bush camo, and that bleeds into a couple other questions I saw asking, will these gadgets be updated? Like bush camo, we know is really good on some maps, but it's essentially useless on many others if there's not a matching bush texture or something similar.
Right. Yeah, the bush one I've thought about. Something that I've had a bit of trouble resolving, and maybe the community has an answer to this too, is it would be interesting if the bush camo were an armor like the armor is, but at the same time, you might not want to have it on 100% of the time like you do with armor. Like armor, you can't unequip it and hold it in your inventory simultaneously. But the bush camo, currently, you can equip it and unequip it while it's still in your inventory. But it seems like the bush camo would be a more useful tool if you could use it and use a gun or another gadget or something simultaneously with it. Although that might also make it way too powerful. On making it so that it has a per map sort of design, I think that's possible. I'm wondering if it would be something like per map, you could just make a prefab and say, this is the, this is the bush camo thing that gets repeated over your body. Because right now it's just basically 3 of the bushes that are in Riverside kind of scaled and rotated in a way that covers you up. So it seems pretty feasible to make it so that you could just have a prefab in a scene and then say, this is what the bush camo is made of in this map.
So kind of moving over to the Mapmaker side of things, we've got another question from Spooky asking about expansion to custom item system in Mapmaker. Stuff like holding custom items in first person, having custom functions besides just activators, or like the ability for them to be dropped, like you can see with the riot shield, or when someone's holding the briefcase, how it falls off of them. This kind of comes up with the new Mountainside with that custom helicopter key.
Mm-hmm.
A couple people have talked about how it, if someone has a key and they die with the key, it's hard to get it off of them if they fall on top of it, stuff like that. Any plans on expanding the custom item system a bit?
Yeah, so I think one of the first things I would want to try to do is to let it fall off like the shield does. The reason behind that is I think that would open up a lot of game modes that people have been wanting to make inside of the Mapmaker, but wasn't really possible. I mean, if you had, for instance, a back slot, which is going to be the next one that I look at right now, you can only attach it to 2 belt slots. But if you had a back slot, you could pretty much, literally just recreate the briefcase mode using custom items, right? Because you could make a briefcase that's a custom item and it goes on your back. And then if it could fall like the shield does, when you get knocked over, for instance, then you basically have the same functionality that the shield does. So that's one of the priorities. So my priorities there, sum up what I just said, would be more places on your body that it can be, and then having the falling off with physics kind of thing. You could make, people have talked about capture the flag modes, or a single center flag that both teams can pick up mode. As far as carrying it in your hand, that's more difficult from a first person animation thing, because then it's like, okay, how do you make sure that the character's first person hand actually grabs the item correctly, because we don't have like animation tools and stuff like that in the Mapmaker. So that seems much more far off if that were to be something that we worked on.
Awesome. Well, you've been talking for quite a bit, so I figure I might take the hot seat here. There's a couple ICL questions, so if you don't mind, I'm going to go through those real quick. So the first most pointed question is, when will ICL9 start? And feel free to hop in if I'm saying anything you want to speak on, Robs, but
sure.
I'm just going to go here. I'm aiming to start kicking stuff off by August. We'll probably have a couple weeks earlier. I know it's only 2 weeks to August, but maybe in a week or so, planning on getting pre-sign-up set up, get the existing community set up, ready to go, because I've talked with Rob a bit about this, and feedback from the competitive players were that having official support of ICL would be very much appreciated, and such as like we did with ICL5, where we had 40 teams and many people said they joined the Discord, they're still here in the Discord, they heard about ICL because of an official Steam post. So now that the summer sales ended, we've got a bunch of new players. We're looking at working with, because ICL has been very community driven, we're focusing on working with the dev team just a little bit, seeing what official support we can get for ICL. So that's why hopefully August is when I'm going to start that stuff, just so we have everything in place. If you see, we're going over the rules, we're going over a lot of stuff right now, making sure it's in tip-top shape before the devs, put themselves out there and stick a big, nice post or something about it.
Yeah, I think having a post for it would be really cool, especially with Mountainside 2.0 and everything. I want to see how that plays competitively already, and what kind of changes to the design and everything would come out of that.
And then while this isn't quite ICL related, we've got a couple questions talking about official maps, other maps in general, balance goals. So from Lowman, we've got a question saying, what are the balance goals for casual versus serious gameplay? Is one or the other prioritized when you're working on balance or making maps?
When my approach to making maps is always towards, what's going to provide a stealth experience, what's going to provide an experience where cool stuff happens and where immersive stuff happens and where it feels like, oh, I'm playing like a single player stealth action game, but it's actually online with other people. So I don't know how I would, maybe Ra, you can give me your thoughts on this too. I'm not sure how I'd categorize that as casual versus serious, but the idea, my kind of philosophy going into some of the map design is how can I make this as immersive and stealthy, and kind of that story comes out of the gameplay and interacting with the map as much as possible.
Yeah, I think you would generally lead more towards the serious side of things, because as fun as it is to do a team rush across a bridge, that's not what you appear to want in the game. Example, the bridge doors are always locked. The bridge has shutters. I don't know how many people were around back before the bridge had shutters and when the doors could be unlocked. And it was crazy times. Changes were made to be more serious, slow down gameplay. And that seems to be the direction I've seen. For example, these newer maps, Intruders don't start off with mantas anymore, which we saw in old Cliffside. Now new Cliffside, they don't have them. Old Oceanside versus new Mountainside. New Oceanside. And, old Mountainside always had that, but we're seeing a lot more movement towards serious gameplay. Like you said, kind of single-player stealth-based action. So there's definitely still a place for casual, but I do agree that it looks like you guys are developing more towards the serious audience.
Yeah, and there's also always Mapmaker stuff as well for, we have so many Mapmaker maps that are all sorts of things from serious to insane. And I think that's really cool. Yeah, but like what you said.
And then touching on that single player aspect, AI has been on the roadmap for quite some time now. Do you have any sort of expectation or prediction on when that could be available? What would come with it? Are you thinking more of PvE type missions, or how would AI integrate an Intruder?
Right. So I don't have the exact timeline for it right now. The goal is definitely to have something that's more of a PvE type experience, but where right now the focus is on guard AI, because how guards and intruders behave in this game is very different from each other. So with the guard stuff in the current versions of the AI that we have, the guards have patrol paths and they have rooms that they go to, and they will check on, dead bodies, and you can stealth around them. They're very, very deadly to encourage you to use your gadgets and use your tools and all that. And it's fun. It's really hard, but it's fun so far, and it works already in a multiplayer setting. It's not just you by yourself against bots. You can actually join with another person and play against this guard AI together. As far as the timing of it, why I'm saying, I don't have an exact timeline for it is because earlier this year, and I know, Rai, you and I talked a lot about this. Earlier this year, I was heavily doing all of the AI stuff, and then, some events came up, like the April Fool's events, and then it was like, all right, we're getting really far in Mountainside, but we want to put all of our effort into wrapping this up so that Mountainside is out in some way for the Steam summer sale, and so that people can play that. Like, that's something where Matt was working on that, Polly was working on that, both of them heavily, but they also needed me in order to finish some of the features and look at some of the optimization and code entirely new features for Mountainside 2.0. And unfortunately, with the development of Intruder right now, and you'll see this with a bunch of stuff, is that as far as the game code goes, I'm the main person that's working on all of that. So that means if I'm working on AI, but then suddenly, okay, now we need to be working on Mountainside or this or that or whatever, that means I need to halt work on AI. And that's what happened in this case, where I had to stop completely just so that we could really bust our asses to get Mountainside to where it is right now. And yeah, so all of my effort went from working on AI stuff, went 100% into the Mountainside development and some of those bug fixes we had to do with the joining rooms and the map synchronization stuff. So that's kind of a thing too, where it's also like, if I have Matt and Polly working on something, because I'm sort of the bottleneck code wise, one of the main reasons I have to pick up, stop what I'm doing on one thing to help them out is because I don't want them to stop having progress on their work, because I need to code something for them. So that's kind of sort of the workflow right now, and the pattern of stuff. So it's definitely a balancing act where we're trying as much as possible to get out new stuff, but that also means sometimes you have to pause on things that you were really heavily working on. And in this case, it was AI, so that Mountainside 2.0 could come out.
Nice. So you talked about a bit how, staffing is a big thing, right? You have to stop what you're doing to work on other stuff. Cross asked a question saying, what are the have you considered onboarding more temp workers to get stuff done? And I know you kind of briefly talked about new animations and stuff like that, but is there anything you can expand upon with that?
Yeah, I mean, as far as people wanting to help out and work on stuff too, we've got people doing the TikTok stuff. We've got people making skins, like Random has been making skins that I am going to be putting in soon. And, there's stuff that people are working on and helping out with, and volunteering on stuff. in terms of bringing on, just it's definitely a balancing act, again, from a company perspective, with bringing on new people, and people also don't just pop out of nowhere either. It's like everybody that's working on the game right now is pretty much people that were in this community. Like Duke was coding his entire Intruder stats kind of website before he started working on the website and things with us. And Matt and Polly were working on their own maps that were really good and for a long time. And I was like, all right, let's do some stuff together. So it's like, yeah, we definitely want more people working with us, but we have to consider our budget and everything like that. And it's like, Intruder is a game that we want going for as long as possible. So we've been pretty conservative about, okay, if we bring people on to do stuff, we want to make sure that, it's the right people and that this will increase kind of our sort of output and kind of the speed that new things come out.
Yeah, so we're gonna go a bit into a different question here. A couple people, not to be a downer, but a couple people have asked if there's anything you have about people who have doubts about the progress of the game. Topics like player count, long-standing bugs, slow content, etc.
Yeah, I mean, that's all stuff that we wanted to answer with this, and the transparency stuff, right, was just looking at, okay, we are constantly, or we're making progress and we're outputting stuff, but the reason why the pace is what it's at right now is because of bottlenecks that we have kind of all over the place, because we have so few people working on such a huge kind of game. And that, like if something needs to be changed for a map and it requires code, then that means I need to do it. And if you release a version, it's definitely a lot. As far as player count stuff goes, I think that's a perpetual issue in a lot of multiplayer games, is sort of fluctuating player count stuff. I wonder from the community kind of what they think keeps them playing on certain games versus other ones. I have thought in the past that, okay, a matchmaking system and other things that's not just the server list would be helpful for that. But the other side of it is we're literally not doing any advertising right now whatsoever. The only kind of real, like the biggest advertising thing that we did was when we had our first sale and when we released unlocks and stuff back a couple years ago. And when we did that, we had the opportunity to get on the front page of Steam during that. And I think being on the front page of Steam, that was a big deal for us. But as someone posted on the latest update about this, and they were talking about, why don't you advertise the game more versus developing more? Right now, the focus has been on development. But I think once we get closer to a 1.0 stage, and a 1.0 stage means the maps all look as good as, Cliffside and Mountainside does now, that we have the AI, that we have the third person animations. And once we get closer to that, then we can start shifting gears more to, okay, now we have a game that looks polished. Now we can start saying, okay, let's get this on a Steam front page again. Let's run sales like that again. Let's actually start reaching out to people again now that we have this game that looks much more like the finished vision of it in the first place.
So speaking of the finished vision, that kind of goes to a couple questions here about the roadmap finalization of Intruder. like it's still in early access. It's been for quite some time.
Yep.
We've got some questions like from Courts. Will the iconic Intruder and Guard player models be touched up?
Yeah.
That's a pretty quick yes answer. But then there's some more questions about the roadmap. What can we expect? And there's kind of a question from me at the top was, what comes next? Now that Mountainside 2 is kind of wrapping up, what's the next big thing for Intruder?
In terms of very next stuff, Mountainside 2 is still, called Mountainside 2.0 beta. We are trying to wrap that up as quickly as possible, and that includes, there's two main goals in that. The main goals in that are get the different day and night states in it, because right now it's only day, especially with the spotlight not having night or something is kind of funny. I want to, get that sort of feel of Mountainside night again and that sort of stealth. So Matt's been working on that. And then the other side of it is the optimization stuff. After we released it at the beginning of the Steam summer sale, just put tons and tons of work into optimizing it more and cleaning it up more, and got some pretty big frame rate boosts from that. But there's definitely still more that we can do. And I was working on a custom, or we've started working on, and Polly was working on this too, but a custom occlusion system so that it makes sure that, okay, if I'm outside of the building and far from it, make sure that nothing inside of the building is rendering except for the things that you can see out of the windows. For whatever reason, Unity's occlusion culling system is just not that accurate. We got a bunch of different asset store plugins that were supposed to be more accurate, but they were buggy and didn't quite work for Intruders. But we have this this idea that should make that even more optimized so that the frame rate is kind of closer no matter where you are on the map. I know right now when you're inside the map or in the building that the frame rate is generally very good, but that's some of the sections outside. I get like 100 frames per second when I'm far from the building and looking at it. I would like to get that up to 120. So that's what I'm looking into. So there's that. There is coming back to AI. Matt just opened up Checkpoint again. We're getting all of the old Checkpoint stuff into our sort of mapping project, which has everything from Cliffside and New Mountainside and all of the assets from that. So we're working on that. So he's actually able to work on that, hopefully while I'm working on other things simultaneously. But my goals are going to be optimization, finishing Mountainside 2.0, AI, and then the animation stuff.
So I think that kind of hits all the questions we've had about development moving forward with Intruder and more gameplay aspects. So I'm going to start going through. I've been trying to keep the theme flowing here, but I'm just trying to make sure everyone gets their questions answered now. So let's go to the first one here, which was from Spooky. What's your philosophy on Intruder's sound design? Do you like the idea of hardcore sound usage, almost like Rainbow Six Siege, or is there a more casual approach with just more general sound cues?
I think hardcore stuff is cool. I think one of the design goals for Intruder has always been that you use your senses, you use your sight and your ears and interacting with the environment and all that as much as possible to kind of gain awareness of where the other players are and what just happened. That's the whole reason why we have minimal UI on the screen and all that, is because you're supposed to be relying on your senses and not relying on UI in order to figure out things. So I'm definitely down for, more accurate and more hardcore sound stuff, because that fits within the philosophy of the game for sure.
Cool. Another question from Mancuba is he'd like to know if you're going to delve deeper into the game's history. I'm taking this more as to mean lore.
Lore.
Exactly, yeah, because we
Yeah.
see the big map, we
Yep.
hear about the bend slip, but what more
Yeah.
can be expanded on?
There is, a lore and backstory to the game. I think I've typed out kind of the outline of that in places before. There's definitely not all of the exact details of the plot and the characters and things, but there is the shape of the lore for what the island is and what the companies are on it and who the intruders are and who the guards are and all that. I would love to be able to tell more of that in the game in a multiplayer setting. I would love to be able to tell more of that in sort of these PvE or versus the AI settings. I'd love to be able to tell more of that in the tutorial. Love other ways of telling that. Somebody proposed like a comic or something before. That would be kind of neat. It's definitely not a priority on our development list, but I do think it would feel nice for the game to be able to get more of that out there, because I think Intruder and the island and everything and its settings as sort of a world is a really cool place, and feeling connected to the different maps and the areas and knowing what their meaning is. And if we make a new official map on the island, if you could see one of the other sections of the island or even see one of the other maps from that one, I think that's a really cool vibe and awesome kind of thing that I want to go for.
That sounds exciting. I'm looking forward to the Intruder comic when that comes out.
Yeah.
So while I see some new questions came in. While I look at those real quick, a less serious question from Quartz earlier was, what's your favorite music to listen to when you're developing?
A lot of times now I don't necessarily listen to music. Like I'm a musician too, and I play a lot of piano and guitar, and I compose, and I wrote some of the music that's in Intruder and all that. Some of the reasons I don't listen to music is because then I'll start concentrating on the music and start kind of picking it apart. I'm like, oh, I wonder what those chords were or whatever that they did there. And then I'll go over and sit at the keyboard or something and try to pluck that out, or I'll get a song stuck in my head. But music that I like is all over the place. I mean, I listen to classical and metal and electronic stuff and old rock and jazz and just all sorts of stuff. I've linked stuff in the music channel for a long time too.
Yeah, check out the music channel if you haven't already.
And you can see some stuff that I've written on my SoundCloud and all that as well.
Oh yeah, gotta get the SoundCloud plug in there.
Yeah, there it is.
So from Cross, we're kind of going back into, I guess, more meta topics here. He's asking, how do you feel about a feedback or idea type system? We currently have SBA, but that's player idea feedback. He'd like to see a way to see posts and whatnot about many of these future ideas that are being discussed today, with their ability to provide thoughts and input on them. So I guess it's kind of like reverse SBA, right? Where instead of SBA people saying, hey, this would be a cool idea, maybe you saying, oh, here's a cool idea I had. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would that just manifest in me or anybody working on the game making a post in a new forum maybe, so that they know that we started it?
Yeah, that could be something. Yeah, we could definitely look into something like that. I could look and see where we could throw something in the Discord on that. Maybe open up
Right.
SBA a bit more so more eyes are on it, stuff like that. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool.
I guess one of my questions I just had right now, for instance, was about the bush camo and using it as armor instead of as a separate item. And, that's one of them.
Yep. New question is, what do you think about adding more skins and fixing the rarity of some skins? Like we know there's like a bronze panther and a bronze shrike, and one of them is red and one of them is purple.
Yep.
I mean that's just the one example I can think of off the top of my head. What are your thoughts on skins in the future of Intruder?
Some of the rarity stuff, I know, Rye, you've asked me about that. I wasn't super particular about, say, that one color is a certain rarity on one item versus another. I had no problem with that. And for some reason, intuitively to me, that feels fine because like having a small amount of gold on a small weapon feels different from a large amount on a large weapon. That's just intuitively how I think about stuff. But I also get what you're saying where it's like, oh, everything of this similar design should be on the same rarity type.
Mm-hmm.
As far as adding more of them, like I was saying before, it's cool that we've had some people step up to start kind of making some skins that we can put in. They've kind of volunteered to do that. But like I was saying before, even with other people making the skins, I'm kind of the bottleneck for inserting them into the game because it's not. We've made the process pretty automatic to put them in. We've made it as automatic as we can, but it still takes a lot of time even to just get a few new skins in. Maybe we can make that process faster, but it's like, okay, where do we put our time right now? Like, I know Random had some skins that he made that he wanted me to put in for the summer sale, but I just got so kind of, overtaken by the mountainside stuff that even though it seems like a small thing to put those in, it takes a decent chunk of time for any of the new unlocks to put them in.
Yeah, that sounds good though. Yeah, I like the forward thinking on that.
Yeah, it's like making it more automatic would be good, but that's, kind of a question that you field to the community again. It's like, would you like us to prioritize right now working on new unlocks, or would you like us to prioritize AI? And one of those things, like making new unlocks, you can get more of those faster because it is a shorter amount of work to do those, but that means that time that goes into that is taken away from time that goes into AI. So it's like short-term gains versus a long-term kind of goal that we want to finish up. Usually we've had kind of a balancing act. If it's like, okay, we got this long-term thing that we know is going to take a while, but we have to mix that up with more frequent updates for smaller stuff.
Yeah, speaking of long-term planning, next question from Santo is, are there any other planned long-term official community events? Stuff like in the past, we had the themed map competition. Specifically calls out saying ICL is pretty big, but would prefer something more casual, which would be cool to see, as well as having item unlocks that we've seen from ICL. Specifically, shout out to the people hosting the Chaos Tournament. He said he's not sure if it brought new players to the game, but it definitely got a player such as himself more involved in the community of the game. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I would love to do more themed mapped competition stuff and more kinds of tournaments and things. Something I've talked with you about, Rye, as well, and this is another question that I would pose to the community is, how can we get more eyes on the competitive stuff and these cool events that people are doing outside of the Discord? like how do we get that on YouTube or Twitch or Reddit or some other website where it's like, oh, what's this, where people that haven't even played Intruder are like, oh, what's this cool thing that's happening? And this is like, because those events are really cool, and watching some of the competitive stuff is really exciting when you know when to watch it. But how do we get it so that there's digestible stuff or highlight reels or something like that people who haven't seen Intruder, or even, I mean, I just want to watch it. I want a highlight reel of things that have happened in the competitive matches and things.
Yeah, definitely. It's great to hear that you're very open to the community hosting events and starting their stuff as well. That's definitely something hopefully I can help with in the future as well. And yeah, sounds like we can get some cool new events coming soon. Speaking of communication between devs and players, Cross asks, are you aware of small issues, stuff like crouch jumping, making noise in first person but being silent in third person? He wonders how many small things there are that may not require much work to be fixed but just aren't really well known about. And while I know that you know about some of these issues, it seems that there seems to be a disconnect between the community and the dev process.
Yeah, so always with, putting stuff in quotes of what's minor and what's small. Some of those things like the crouch jumping, making noise in first person but not third person. I mean, that was actually a conscious thing that I know that I did years ago, and it's kind of similar to the hand signals making noise for your teammates and not for the enemies, where I get that it's inconsistent, but I thought that it might feel weird in first person if crouch jumping made no sound. But then I also wanted to make sure that you could still stealth around other people while jumping from a crouch position, which you just use to, get up small boxes and things like that sometimes. So I didn't want to ruin the stealth aspect just by trying to get up on top of something. I think maybe a better solution to that would be that it does make a jumping sound in first person, and it does make it in third person, but just the radius of it in third person is much, much smaller than the standing jump sound. So that, yes, an enemy could hear you jumping from crouch, but only if they're really close to you. Maybe that's a better solution to that. As far as things being seen as minor or small to fix, there's tons of issues which we've had to fix before, which seemed like they were small or seemed like they were minor, and were absolutely not whatsoever, and maybe took weeks or occasionally months to fix, and then still weren't quite fixed. There's the whole saga last year, that Ryan and I talked about, and I showed, where it was trying to prevent the player clipping through walls as much as possible. And Action Man wrote me, this shader and everything to try to clip people correctly if you budge into a wall in some way. And this is something that we hoped that we could wrap up in a couple weeks once we had that shader working, but it ended up being like, I don't know, 2 months or something of me just trying to work on this one problem, and it's still not working because of the way that some of the animations were and stuff like that, even though we thought we had like an ace in the hole of fixing it because of that awesome shader that Action Man made. So it's definitely, I'm just trying to say, be a bit cautious when wondering about which things are minor or small. In the case of this crouch jump one, yeah, I think that solution that I said could be pretty cool if that sounds satisfactory. But other things, it totally depends on what the problem is.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that also, Cross says that's why he put quotes around small, and like you're saying,
Sure. Yeah.
Next question is more hand signs, and then there's another follow-up saying, more hand signs and more discernible hand sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just talked with Stev about more hand sign stuff. I think that would be cool. I mean, another thing with hand signs is you need both the first person animation and the third person animation. And you need to make sure that that it doesn't interact with your gun or gadget that you're holding in a weird way. Like we have certain, like we had to make a system for making sure that you can't hand signal during certain animations and stuff like that because your left hand is currently doing something. But I do want more hand signs for sure. I think it'd be cool, but yeah, just have to remember it needs both the first person and the third person animation to get it set up correctly.
Cool. So you and Stev were talking about hand signs. This one comes from Stev saying that you guys have been talking about some additions to the tutorial as well. Any more details on what that would entail?
Yeah, so Matt and I were talking about tutorial stuff. He thinks a priority that we should have is making the tutorial more polished because it really is it is the first thing that you get shot into when you start the game, right? And it's basically a glowing kind of gray box of a map. So I totally get that if this is the first impression that people get of the game, that you want to make that tutorial as, cool and immersive and comprehensive as possible so that people get a great first impression when they get into the game. I don't know if I want to talk too much about it, but the goal for that would be to start off in a base that's on one of the smaller islands to the northwest of the city, and that you'd have kind of a view of the island from there. And then you'd be stepped through different types of training and using, the different movements and tools and everything. That's one of the ideas that we have. But that's definitely a big undertaking. I mean, that's like making a new map close to the quality of cliffside or mountainside just for the sake of a tutorial. So the question out to the community is, this is something that will be cool, but for you as people that are experienced players of the game, it will be cool and immersive and a better tutorial, but will you gain something from it in a big way? Probably not, except will new players gain something from it? Hopefully. Will it mean more people stick around in the game because they understand it better? Hopefully. Or could tutorials also be something where it's a tutorial per map, where it shows them around Riverside, for instance, or Cliffside, or what have you? So that's making a good tutorial like that. Like that's a big undertaking. I think it's important for getting new people into the game and keeping more people longer that get kind of confused when they first get in, because Intruder is a difficult game. But also maybe once we have the AI in, if people can play against the AI, then that functions as another way of helping them learn the game.
Yeah, I'm always happy to see new players. And while, it's always fun to teach a new player, you'd hope that a player hops in and they can be a great, awesome, cool teammate as soon as they join. So that seems like a great way to get that started.
Hopefully, yeah.
Spooky asks, will we ever get first-person spectating anytime soon? And then that kind of a follow-up on that is Freaky Gord was asking any sort of engagement or something to do after you're dead, because both of these questions here are kind of asking limit spec is kind of just you're stuck there, not very fun.
Right. I think first-person spectating would be awesome. It's definitely something that's been kind of on our minds for a long time. It hasn't been a priority over things like refinishing the maps, over things like AI and all that. So it's definitely something I want. It just hasn't been a priority yet. And it's definitely not an easy task either.
For sure, yeah. But that's definitely being thought of.
Yeah,
Freaky Gourds,
especially with Intruder too, where it's like, oh, you've got, it's not just like putting the camera in first person, like you've got how accurate do you want it to be in terms of like the way that the gun sways and everything like that. Like there's a bunch of really small details and stuff that we have in first person that are relevant to the gameplay. So making sure that that first person spectating feels accurate or good enough, like we don't want a crappy feeling version of that.
yeah, and then Freaky Gourd kind of had a second part is um, some games, such as Rainbow Six, allow you to interact with the living players through something like cameras or communication. Obviously, it's not very much intruder-like to allow the dead
Yeah,
folk to talk to the living folk, and that leads to problems such as ghosting and other issues.
yeah.
But is there any sort of, what are your thoughts on that?
I wouldn't currently have any way of the dead interacting with the living or some kind of respawning. I think if we did something like that, it would have to be an entirely new sort of game mode instead of a default mode, because that definitely breaks away from what Intruder has been as a game for a long time and kind of the initial goals of it.
Yep, and that leads right into GetFake's question asking if there's going to be any more game modes. For example, something like an escape map where the intruders have to escape a complex using stealth.
Yeah, so just some ideas that Matt and I were talking about the other day, and where I was talking about focusing more on stealth and what really gives that stealth experience. We were actually looking over Stealth High Rise by Spooky in terms of what are more things that we can do that force certain kinds of stealth, and I came up with a lot of ideas for that today that I'm pretty excited about. So yeah, but just something to look at, and considering using checkpoint for some of those ideas as well, where one of the ideas for checkpoint was always for intruders to actually start in the building and for the guards to be the ones that are kind of attacking, so to speak. But I've got some really good ideas the past couple days for new sorts of game modes and stealth modes that integrate with a map.
That sounds cool. I mean, maybe even some existing, like how we have a couple handful of game modes on Riverside.
Yep.
Cool. Shelly is asking, have ICL8 rewards been giving out yet? And if not, when will they be available? They have not been given out yet. Thanks for the reminder. I know I've been going back and forth with Rob a bit on this. There were a couple issues on their end regarding getting the community art in, because we had some cool community art submitted to be used as tags. We've worked to streamline this process, so it slowed us down for Season 8, but it should be better for Season 9 going forward. So those will be available, I'm hoping, before Season 9 starts, and then hopefully this is all ironed out. Season 9 stuff will come out pretty soon after.
Yeah. Just again with the unlocks and rewards and stuff like that, like it has been absolutely balls to the walls, Mountainside 2.0 for literally everybody that's working on the game. So now that that's in a calmer state, we can start doing more of this stuff. But as I've kind of reiterated throughout this conversation, that when we do one of these things, it stops the other thing until that happens. And so it's definitely, again, a balancing act. But yeah, want to get that out before the next tournament starts.
Awesome. And I feel like that hits all the questions we've had so far. I see a couple people typing, so I will give a moment for that. Bobbert is talking about the flashlight shotgun. There was a brief discussion about that kind of when we were talking about animations, so if and when we get a recording of this up, I guess you can kind of go back and find that. But yeah, while I see 2 or 3 people typing here, is there anything you want to share, Rob, that you feel like, oh, nobody asked this, but I feel like it'd be good for people to know?
Let's see. I guess there's questions to shoot back to the community as well, like you were talking about before, like about how Mountainside 2.0 is going in terms of gameplay, about how testing is going. I've been a bit more loose about just releasing stuff on live, just to get things out there. And I wonder how people feel about that too, because I know sometimes it's difficult to get a group of people on to test certain features. And I'm wondering what the general sense is from the community of like, oh, just, if you're working on a bug or a new idea, just shoot it out to live and see what happens.
For sure. I gave people a chance to ask their questions. Freaky Gord did reply, kind of saying his question. This is probably also on me for focusing it more on dead players affecting rounds. But he was just asking more about dead player engagement. Any ideas for anything for them to do besides fly around the map, or if you're in limited spec, just watch your teammates?
I've had an absurd idea for what happens if you get knocked out by a tranquilizer, if we ever put that in. I won't get into that. As far as dead players go, I'm wondering if we've talked before about maybe some kind of planning tools, so that if you're dead with other teammates, that you could, I don't know, look at a map and communicate stuff and things and kind of plan the next round. But I don't have any super solid ideas for what players ought to do when they're dead. If you do have ideas for that, that's cool. You could do something where like it puts you in one-on-one gunfights in some box, over in the corner until the round finishes, which would be like, completely separated from watching your live players. But yeah, basically a mini game while you're dead. But I'm open to ideas. I just haven't thought about it a ton.
Yeah, that sounds cool. We've got a couple more questions here. Let's see if I can wrap this up, because we've been here for almost an hour and a half now. So thanks for sticking with us, everyone. Spooky asks, what's the philosophy on updating the Mapmaker tools? Understand it's not a priority, but is there some sort of goal that you update it every few updates or so? Or is it mainly when you run into issues like with Mountainside that you need to make Mapmaker tools? And then, for example, he says, might be another topic, but something like the custom footstep sounds that, or other player prefab ways to affect that.
Right. So with updating Mapmaker tools, it's definitely helpful when we make a new map or when we make a new feature of the game that's like, oh shit, we need to make a new Mapmaker script or something so that this works. And actually working on Cliffside 2.0 and working on Mountainside 2.0 has given us tons and tons of features that used to only be in Riverside or kind of the official maps, the old versions of the official maps that you couldn't do in the Mapmaker tool. But because Cliffside and Mountainside are literally made using the Mapmaker, we had to figure out ways of doing that so that the Mapmaker tools are more powerful. as far as releasing those tools, right now we had tons of stuff that we had to make for Mountainside 2.0, and I would love to give those things to the community. I'm just trying to make sure that it's all squared away and clean and that it's all working as intended in Mountainside 2.0 before releasing it, especially because if we end up modifying one of those scripts or some of the variables in the scripts, it has a chance of breaking, any map that uses them right now. And that's something that we've tried very hard not to do, is, breaking old versions of maps or scripts in those maps because of an update that we did. So I try to be pretty careful before just releasing, new tools to the Mapmaker versions that everyone can download.
Awesome. Love to see Mapmakers. Shout out to Spooky for making maps and all the other Mapmakers.
For sure. In here. Absolutely.
Next question is from Chicho. Could there be or would there be a change in the way people join SBA? Sometimes it feels like the process is on a constant freeze state unless there's something to test specifically. Maybe I can kind of feel this one a bit. SBA is pretty open right now. I mean, if you look in like the past 2 or 3 months, we've had less than 10 people apply on the application. Lots of these people, the bare minimum for putting people in SBA is usually, are they present in the Discord? And it seems like everyone who is active and present seems to already be in SBA. Thoughts on maybe opening it up more? Like, for example, we have bots in the channel. Maybe people could react and SBA could just be an opt-in from the player side. What are your thoughts on something like that, Rob?
Yeah, I think the testing stuff and SBA thing is a really complicated issue. You have a lot of people that are, they've got their own schedules and things that they're doing, and if we do want to test something, making sure that people are there when we're doing that is pretty complicated, and that's why I asked earlier about, how do people feel about just blasting certain updates to live and seeing what happens. But I know that's been a back and forth difficult topic to talk about between you and me, Rye, as well as what's the best way to manage that.
I mean, to throw the question back at Chicho, right? Because he's the one working on Bloon the most.
Right. Sure.
I think I'm totally cool with more people in SBA. Talk with SBA people. Yeah, I see him editing his message there. Maybe it could be something, right under the news or dev updates. Hey, react with a, intruder emoji on this to be added to SBA. Yeah, and Spooky's asking if that's a correct pronunciation. I'm hoping it is, and I got a yes from him, so
amazing.
Good things there, yeah. Cross wants you to look at his ping and his DM, please. Thank you. That's what he says.
Okay.
But yeah, that seems to be all of the questions we've had here. It's been a really fun past hour and a half or so.
If you guys want to leave feedback on this too, this is all we've been taking a lot of steps towards all right, how can we kind of engage with everybody more and be transparent and everything, and hopefully this has been part of that. So definitely field us feedback on how this has gone and what we can do next time as well.
Okay, one more question, or series of questions came in from Nyafka here. Seems like he's getting straight to the point. Is Intruder development a job for the developers, or is it a serious hobby? And then I'm just going to keep going through his list because a lot of them seem pretty similar. Does revenue come in the game come in waves, or is it drawn out across all the years? And how does that money go back into developing the game versus treating as take-home income for the developers?
Right. So as far as being a job, in terms of people in the company, for me it is my job. It's not a hobby at all. This is my full-time job. Other people that work in the company have other jobs as well, and then doing, contracting stuff while we're working on it. So again, this comes back to what I was saying before, that we want to kind of make sure that Intruder and the development from it is going as smoothly as possible, as long as possible. So we have to be pretty conservative about, how we spend stuff. Intruder has never had investors or anything in it whatsoever, so it's funded totally by the sales of the game.
Nice. And then a final word. He says, not a question or anything, but Spooky does say that he appreciates the further transparency in the development in the community. And a lot of people seem to have given it a thumbs up. So, we've been hounding you for the past hour and a half here. We hound you every day, but we appreciate what you do.
And I appreciate what you guys do too.
Cool. So I think that about wraps it up. I see there's one quick question from Jacob about hiring game or developers. I believe that was answered in a previous topic. So hopefully this recording gets up there and we can revisit that. But yeah, so I'm going to end the recording here. One more important question from Cross. Rob, guards or intruders? What's your favorite?
I was going to say guards, but I got to go with intruders.
I mean, it's the name of the game, right?
It's the name of the game. But guards, my first instinct was to say guards.
Sounds good. Alrighty, well, I'm going to stop the recording here. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully this gets up. If you're not here and you're listening to this recording later, ping us in the Discord and let us know what you think.
Awesome. All right, thank you, everyone.